All right, kids, get cozy. You know what time it is. It is time for Read Aloud. Our next Read Aloud is my favorite all-time book. It's called Tuck Everlasting. I'll take a picture of it so it isn't backwards for you. Remember, I'm still learning how to do this. The author is Natalie Babbitt, and she has written a lot of different books. If we look at the cover here and do a little previewing, you can see that we want to make sure that we're taking every little bit of info that we can find to give us some clues about when this book might have taken place and the setting in particular. So I'm looking at her shoes. Those don't look like shoes that any of you wear. Looking at her dress, and I don't know. I don't think that's in my closet either. So this might give us some hints as to when this book took place. We're not too sure about the setting yet, although if I look really carefully, maybe she's standing on some dirt. I don't know if that gives us any hints. We have lots of dirt around here in Hawaii. All right, so we're going to dig in. I am going to tell you, though, that, again, part of our preview is that we're going to look at the blurb on the back. So let me read that to you. Is eternal life a blessing or a curse? That is what young Winnie Foster must decide when she discovers a spring on her family's property whose waters grant immortality. Members of the Tuck family, having drunk from the spring, tell Winnie of their experiences watching life go by and never growing older. But then Winnie must decide whether or not to keep the Tuck's secret and whether or not to join them on their never-ending journey. Take a second to think about that, readers. Is eternal life a blessing or a curse? If you could live forever, would that be a good thing or not? Guess we're going to explore some of this as we read Tuck Everlasting. Prologue. Get cozy, everyone. Find a good, comfortable place. You can pause me if you want. Get a blanket. We're going to be here for a little bit. Prologue. The first week of August hangs at the very top of summer, the top of the livelong year, like the highest seat of a Ferris wheel when it pauses in its turning. The weeks that come before are only a climb from the balmy spring, and those that follow drop to the chill of autumn. But the first week of August is motionless and hot. It is curiously silent, too, with blank white dawns and glaring noons, and sunsets smeared with too much color. Often at night there is lightning, but it quivers all alone. There is no thunder, no relieving rain. These are strange and breathless days, the dog days, when people are led to do things that they are sure to be sorry for after. Ominous there. One day at that time, not so very long ago, 3 things happened, and at first there appeared to be no connection between them. At dawn, May Tuck set out on her horse for the woods at the edge of the village of Tree Gap. She's setting out on her horse. That's a clue I want to tuck away for later. She was going there, as she did once every 10 years, to meet her 2 sons, Miles and Jesse. At noontime, Winnie Foster, whose family owned the Tree Gap Wood, lost her patience at last and decided to think about running away. Why are the kids in our books always running away? Didn't Amy Ann think about that? Actually, she did it, didn't she? And at sunset, a stranger appeared at the Foster's gate. He was looking for someone, but he didn't say who. No connection, you would agree. but things can come together in strange ways. The wood was at the center, the hub of the wheel. All wheels must have a hub. A Ferris wheel has one, as the sun is the hub of the wheeling calendar, and also our universe. Fixed points they are, and best left undisturbed, for without them, nothing holds together. But sometimes people find this out too late. Chapter 1. The road that led to Tree Gap had been trod out long before by a herd of cows who were, to say the least, relaxed. It wandered along in curves and easy angles, swayed up and off in a pleasant tangent to the top of a small hill, ambled down again between fringes of bee-hung clover, and then cut sidewise across a meadow. So I think what the author's trying to tell me is that this road is not straight and that the cows just ate their way along and went wherever they went, and their path became the road. So you can imagine this really curvy, winding road that seems to not be going anywhere. Here, its edges blurred. It widened and seemed to pause, suggesting tranquil bovine picnics. So here the cows stopped and grazed for a while. Slow chewing and thoughtful contemplation of the infinite. And then it went on again and came at last to the wood. But on reaching the shadows of the first trees, it veered sharply, swung out in a wide arc, as if, for the first time, it had reason to think where it was going, and it passed right around. On the other side of the wood, the sense of easiness dissolved. The road no longer belonged to the cows. It became instead, and rather abruptly, the property of people. And all at once the sun was uncomfortably hot, the dust oppressive, and the meager grass along its edges somewhat ragged and forlorn. On the left stood the first house, a square and solid cottage with a touch-me-not appearance, surrounded by grass cut painfully to the quick, and enclosed by a capable iron fence some 4 feet high, which clearly said, "Move on. We don't want you here." I'm going to take a second here. I want to go back and think about this house. A square and solid cottage with a touch-me-not appearance. Is this house one that you want to go and knock on the door? It also is enclosed by an iron fence that clearly said, "Move on. We don't want you here." I think that's a clue. That first house, it's not very inviting. The neighbors aren't coming up and dropping off cookies, I don't think. Here, the road went humbly by and made its way past cottages more and more frequent, but less and less forbidding, into the village. But the village doesn't matter, except for the jailhouse and the gallows. The first house only is important. The first house, the road, and the wood. There was something strange about the wood. If the look of the first house suggested that you'd better pass it by, so did the look of the wood, but for quite a different reason. The house was so proud of itself that you wanted to make a lot of noise as you passed, and maybe even throw a rock or two. But the wood had a sleeping, otherworldly appearance that made you want to speak in whispers. This, at least, is what the cows must have thought. Let it keep its peace. We won't disturb it. So the cows grazed right along the edge of the wood and didn't go in, which kind of makes sense because it might be hard for cows to go into the woods. But also the wood was just, it was too quiet in there, and so the cows didn't go in through it. Whether the people felt that way about the wood or not, it's difficult to say. There were some, perhaps, who did. But for the most part, the people followed the road around the wood because that was the way it went. There was no road through the wood. And anyway, for the people, there was another reason to leave the wood to itself. It belonged to the Fosters, the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and was therefore private property, in spite of the fact that it lay outside the fence and it was perfectly accessible. The ownership of land, it's an odd thing when you come to think of it. How deep, after all, can it go? If a person owns a piece of land, does he own it all the way down in ever-narrowing dimensions till it meets all the other pieces at the center of the earth? So if your parents own their house, do they own everything under their house all the way down to the core? In any case, the wood, being on top, except of course for the roots, was owned bud and bough by the Fosters in the Touch-Me-Not cottage. And if they never went there, if they never wandered amongst the trees, well, that was their affair. Winnie, the only child of the house, never went there, though she sometimes stood inside the fence, carelessly banging a stick against the iron bars, and looked at it. But she had never been curious about it. Nothing ever seems interesting when it belongs to you, only when it doesn't. And what is interesting anyway about a slim few acres of trees? There will be a dimness shot through the bars of sunlight, a great many squirrels and birds, a deep, damp mattress of leaves on the ground, and all the other things just as familiar, if not so pleasant, things like spiders, thorns, and grubs. In the end, however, it was the cows who were responsible for the wood's isolation. And the cows, through some wisdom they were not wise enough to know they possessed, were very wise indeed. If they had made their road through the wood instead of around it, then the people would have followed the road. The people would have noticed the giant ash tree at the center of the wood. And then, in time, they'd have noticed the little spring bubbling up among its roots in spite of the pebbles piled there to conceal it. And that would have been a disaster so immense that this weary old earth, owned or not to its fiery core, would have trembled on its axis like a beetle on a pin. Next time, until